All right. Good evening, Team Schrader 2020, and welcome to tonight's episode of Let's Crush COVID-19 Together. Tonight, we're going to talk about perspective. Let's talk perspective. After last night's discussion on complicate how things are complicated and complications, I got a lot of questions on perspective. How do we know the truth of what we're getting? How do we know that somebody's not biased in the presentation of their information? And curiously enough, about the same time I was getting a lot of these questions, this link came across, and I thought I'd just share a little clip of a video that was shared with me last night because I know we're all feeling the same way. So let's just take a look real quick at a few seconds of this, and I know that you're going to appreciate the same thing.
Yeah, I really don't understand why everybody isn't following the same rules right now. They're very clear, so let's take a minute and let's go over them again. First, you must not leave the house for any reason, unless of course you have a reason, and then you may leave the house. All stores are closed except those that are open, and all stores must close unless, of course, they need to stay open. This virus is deadly, but don't be afraid of it. It can only kill people who are vulnerable and also those who are not vulnerable. We should stay locked down until the virus stops infecting people. And it will only stop infecting people if enough of us get infected that we build immunity. So it is very important that we get infected and also do not get infected. You should not go to the doctor's office or the hospital unless you have to go there. Unless, of course, you are too sick to go there. This virus has no effect on children except for those children in which it affects. The virus remains active on different surfaces for 2 hours or 4 hours.
And isn't that how we all feel right now with all the miscommunications, the mixed messages that we're getting from the media, from doctors? You listen to one station and you get one report. You listen to another station, you get another report. You listen to yet another station and you get a third view of supposedly the facts, the circumstances, what you should do, what you should not do. We talked yesterday about the lifting of some of the restrictions on the sheltering orders, where some people are balancing their livelihood with protecting their physical health. And I just thought that today would be a perfect day to talk about the dissemination of information, analyzing how can we make sure that the information that we're being given is not from a biased source, that it's based on truth, it's been verified. What are some of the steps that we can do to make sure that we're getting actual accurate information? So one of the ways that we need to approach all of this is through our perspective. Perspective is the point of view from which someone sees an event. And perspective applies not just to the event of COVID-19, but the other events in our lives. The event of right now, many seniors not being able to graduate in the traditional graduation, not having the graduation celebrations, the event of not being able to take vacations that certain people had planned during this time. There's a wealth of events right now that, depending on what our perspective is going to determine our outcomes. So one of the ways that some of the examples that perspective have been sort of elaborated on before is the example of two people in a hospital room looking out the window and seeing, sunshine and trees and birds, and whether that is something that makes them feel happier because they like outdoors and nature, or based on their perspective that they do not like outdoors and nature, they don't like looking out the window. Or another example is when a parent and child go to a museum and they're asked, well, what did you enjoy about the museum? And the parent talks about all the wonderful art and the artists that were displayed and how much they enjoyed this picture or that painting. And the child talks about, well, they really like the toys that were over in the waiting area. That's a different perspective. So perspectives are different at different times and different places in our lives, and also based on different experiences. Just like we talked about last night, people are having different approaches and they have different perspectives to the lifting of the sheltering orders, depending on what is happening in their life. What is their perspective? What is the driving basis of decision making in regard to whether they're going to go back to work? Because some people have already been essential workers, or are they going to stay sheltered because they're non-essential or they are vulnerable? And you just heard this clip where there's even mixed definitions of these terms. So there's a lot of confusion about data and how we should be perceiving the data. So perspective is also how you can explain certain situations that are happening in your life. What is the basis for which you, and the foundation and your worldview for how you explain or how you deliver information? So perspective is two-sided. Perspective is how you receive information and how you deliver information. And it goes back to communication. The effective communication of your perspective can alleviate a lot of misinformation, a lot of misunderstandings. But sometimes it doesn't matter how you deliver your perspective, because if someone is biased, they will receive your perspective in an unfair, unbalanced way. And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But there are several things to keep in mind. Is that bias is, there's several types of bias. Bias really determines your worldview. It determines your environment. Everyone has a different perspective based on their life experiences, based on their current circumstances. No people see the same thing the same way. And we've talked about that a little bit. And that helps us understand and be respectful of other people's positions and other people's perspectives. Your perspective will also determine how you are viewing things. And right now, if part of your perspective is that you are really one of the very clearly determined vulnerable health-wise in our community, your perspective on this COVID-19 sheltering, non-sheltering is very clear. And I'm sure that people around you understand that and they respect that, compared to other people who may not be vulnerable. Also, your perspective can shift and change at different times in your life based on different circumstances in your life, and different times even in the day. I know for many of my friends that when at the beginning of the year, we have new resolutions. We want to be healthier. We're going to go to the gym and we're going to work out every day. So our perspective on managing our diets and managing our workout and making sure that we're trying to meet those resolutions may be different than, say, let's March or May in normal circumstances, when we forget about our perspective, the New Year's resolutions, and our perspectives aren't quite as strong on maintaining that health. And so we're not viewing working out as important. We're not viewing maintaining our diet as important. Another way of describing perspective is people who feel like they have a weight problem. When they look in the mirror, they're always going to think they're overweight or they're underweight. People who cannot embrace and accept their own individual beauty physically, when they look in the mirror, they're automatically going to think, I'm so ugly. I can't stand to look at myself. Some people, when they see a painting, they think, oh, that's the most beautiful painting I've ever seen. And then some people are going to think that's the ugliest painting that I've ever seen. It's all about perspective and where you're coming from, and really based on a little bit about your worldview. Um, Now, let's switch a minute and talk about the 5 important aspects. Well, it's not really 5, but David Johnson wrote an article last year, June 5th of 2019, in Psychology Today, called The Importance of Taking the Perspective of Others. And that helps us also understand what some of our neighbors, some of our family members, some people in our community are actually experiencing. And what the reason that's important is because that allows us to be more respectful and more professional, more just friendly and compassionate to what other people are going through. So, perspectives determine how you see things, he says. And perspectives, furthermore, if you're not careful, can create bias. Out of the mass of detailed information, people tend to pick out and focus on the facts that confirm their prior perceptions and to disregard or misinterpret those that call their perceptions into question. So that's sort of what a lot of us might be going through right now in regard to trying to determine the facts, the information about these daily reports that we get from various sources and various leaders about the status of the impact of COVID on our community. It's just a total mass of information. I know that I've spoken to several people, and some of them believe that this virus is very, very serious. We need to stay indoors. We need to stay sheltered. And then on the other scale, there's some that think, oh, it's just a flu. And it really goes back to some of accepting blindly some of the first information that started to be published in these news releases and these press releases that were happening. Shift to today, the data is a lot different, the perception is a lot different, and so we have to learn skills on how to assimilate all the information that's being thrown at us. And one of the ways that he talks about in here is to understand that the way you have to analyze this information is through 2 lenses. One, from the person or the entity where the information is being delivered to you. Is it verifiable? Is it truthful? Is there a hidden agenda? And then for you to determine, have I already established a very solid bias that I'm not going to accept any objective information, I'm not going to listen to any other side of the data or consider anything else other than what I want to hear. That is how you become aware of whether you're biased in a situation or about a person or about data or a culture or another race, is to start really being aware of how you are accepting information about that person or place or race or, for example, COVID-19, and are you willing to analyze new information, objective, verifiable truth, or not? Because if you get too entrenched in a perspective or a position on a certain issue or topic like COVID-19, and you start only accepting and listening to the data that supports your position, you are less likely then to be able to make the best decision you need to for your family and for yourself. Because that's what we talked about the last few days, is understanding this is very complicated. We can't make the best decisions for us based on a snippet, based on a press release, based on the repeat of a press release, because there are many press releases that have been generated about several different things that contain inaccurate information. So when we accept blindly inaccurate information, we are setting ourselves up for failure, because we're not going to be making the best decisions we can about a situation. So uh, another article I found, and I'll post all of these in the notes. And if you'd like them, just let me know uh, uh, to send to you directly, and I'll be glad to do that. But another article that was published, and I believe this was in Forbes, is that confirmation bias and the power of disconfirming evidence. All humans are guilty of this, all of us. Bias is actually defined as bias is when a source is clearly one-sided in its description of an event. Now, many of our news outlets are clearly biased. They're taking one side or the other. They're either for one party or in opposition to another party. So as long as we understand that sometimes, most of the time, the information that we get from other sources might have a tinge of bias to support either another agenda or another person or another place or just another perception, then we can analyze accurately the data and the information that we've been given. So this confirmation bias article I thought had some great information in it, because it's helpful to us to start integrating some of these strategies in the way we analyze all the information that's coming at us in regard to COVID-19, in regard to all the health data, in regard to all these campaign information, flyers that everybody's getting in their mailbox or getting through Facebook messages or social media. Analyze the source and analyze the data. Make sure that if things are being repeated by candidates, that it's coming from a verified source that actually contains truthful information. If not, then you're going to find yourself in a place where you may be supporting one position or another with faulty information, and get to a place where you wish you hadn't done that. So confirmation bias is our tendency to cherry pick information that confirms our existing perceptions, beliefs, or ideas. So in order to be aware of whether we've allowed our perceptions to shift over into a bias area, we need to be aware of whether we're cherry picking information. Do we just listen to what we want to hear, or are we listening to what we need to hear? Sometimes we need to hear that our position is wrong. Sometimes we need to hear that we are very biased in this position. But if we only hear what we want to hear, if we only listen to stations that tell us what we want to hear or report the news in the way we want it to be reported, then we're going to be missing out on other data that will help us make the right decisions for us. This author goes on to say, failing to interpret information in an unbiased way will lead to serious misjudgments for you, for your family, and for your community. And we don't want that. We want to have the best information, the most truthful information that we can, so that we're making the best decisions possible for the health, welfare, and safety of us individually, of our families, of our neighbors, and our communities, and our country. And as long as we allow ourselves to remain in a place where our perception is no longer objective, and we're not analyzing information in a balanced way, and we've become biased, that's when we start seeing the polarization of all of these issues that we've been seeing. So it's incumbent upon all of us to start exercising more awareness of how we're processing information, of the information that we are receiving, how we're receiving it, where we're receiving it from, and to make sure that we're engaging in a decision-making process that's very healthy. What human beings what the human being is best at doing is interpreting all new information so that their prior conclusions remain intact. That is a direct quote from Warren Buffett. Isn't that the truth? We just want to hear what we want to hear. But guess what happens when we open ourselves up to objective information? We are willing to accept that maybe our perception is wrong. Then we can grow in a whole new way. We can discover a whole new avenue and be innovative about new businesses or new products. When I was in college, I volunteered a lot for my psychology professors and with experiments that they would conduct at the University of Georgia. And one of them was blind tasting for Pepsi and Coca-Cola. Now, I'm born and raised in the state of Georgia. Coke, I think, runs in my blood. I think that I was born with a Coke in my hand. So I have always been biased towards Coca-Cola. I would have told you it tastes better, and I still do. I prefer Coke, but my perception changed when I took part in this blind taste test, because Coke tastes different than Pepsi, but it doesn't mean that it's worse. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't drink Pepsi, but I preferred Pepsi. But that was one of the realizations that I came to on the fact that I needed to become aware of certain entrenched perceptions that may be biased. And so I have, through the years, made sure that I've been very sensitive to the differences in other people. I've tried to be aware and empathetic of what other people's perceptions are, where they're coming from when they disagree with me or when they attack me. And I think that when we can all do that, then we can understand that you don't have to take it personally, and that other people have received information and may not be aware of their biases. Now, again, we can't change that, but what we can do is pay attention to us and how we are processing information and whether we've become biased. I know there's a lot of people in my community still today that are biased towards people who struggle with substance abuse and mental health disorders. And it's not really because they're mean or they're hateful. It's really because they haven't been made aware of all the complications of these diseases, of the scientific evidence that's out there now that supports the fact that these are diseases, and we've gotten it wrong in the past on how we've addressed that. So it is not really the right approach for me to attack them or to be hateful to them because they misunderstand and they're not getting it right. But it's more beneficial for me to try to provide information to my community about changing their perception, about educating them on the disease of substance abuse and addiction, of trying to remove the shame and the stigma that a lot of people who don't understand the disease place on those who struggle with that. Because let's be real, as I've shared with you yesterday, I lost a family member to the disease of alcoholism. And he's not the only one that I'm related to that struggles with the substance abuse disorder or mental health disease. And I guarantee you, there are people in your family, you have friends, everybody struggles with that. It doesn't do the community any good if we're going like this about that issue. So it's building awareness. And just like right now, building awareness of whether you have a bias, of whether I have a bias, being sensitive to that and making sure that we become more open-minded about receiving data that we need to hear rather than spouting off what we want everybody else to hear or believe or attack on some other person. So how do you combat bias? Once you kind of become aware that maybe, all right, I've just been listening to one station or another, or maybe I've just been listening to one person or another, or I blindly believe this about this position, or I blindly believe that cherry trees are the best cherry trees that have ever bloomed, and I refuse to accept anybody else's position. Well, maybe once you become aware that that might be a very biased position, then you can start becoming aware of some strategies and implementing those strategies. So, first of all, we have to understand that it takes a minute to educate yourself. See, as a community, we have now trained ourselves to try to accept news in 2 or 3 minute snippets. And we usually go to one news area, one news station. Actually, there's been a study done that people will get their news first from social media and just kind of blindly accept some of the posts that are being posted, and have actually been confused, have been sort of duped by some fake news. So that's why we all, in order to combat bias, really need to do our research. We need to see if the information that people are giving us is truth. Has it been verified? Has it been vetted? Is it serving the community at large, or is it just serving the agenda of the person that is giving you the information, or the station that's giving you the information? Is it solely truth twisting or partial truth to attack one candidate or another candidate, or one party or another party, or one faith or another faith? If we start building awareness of how we are processing this information, and whether we are allowing ourselves to become biased, then we can really start improving the environment of our entire community. And when we do that, we reduce crime, we reduce acrimony, we reduce a lot of disagreements, we reduce a lot of conflict. And conflict is what breeds a lot of things that come into my courtroom. So, again, a lot of people are like, wow, Judge Schrader, why are you like giving all these messages on Facebook? Number one, I want to live in a healthy, safe, and secure community. Number two, part of a judge's job is to implement strategies so that to keep people out of the courtroom, and B, if people come into the courtroom, to make sure that there's strategies out in our community to keep them from coming back. And so one of the ways we do that is to help people become aware of their own behavior, their own thought processes, and how that impacts everyone around them. So the number one way that you can combat bias, or allowing your perception to get a little bit twisted out of sort of the mid-range of where it needs to be, is to make sure that you're doing your due diligence, and that you're not blindly accepting news reports that you want to hear. Make sure that you are researching, and you're getting all the information to make the right decision for you and your family. Also, we need to become aware that confirmation can cloud our judgment. This author says the complexity of confirmation bias arises partly from the fact that it is impossible to overcome it without an awareness that you are engaging in confirmation bias. Sometimes, even when shown evidence to contradict a biased view, some people will still interpret that evidence in a manner to reinforce their current perspective, because it's so entrenched, and because they refuse to be aware of their own bias. So you may not think that that's harmful for you, but in the long run, long term, it can be. And that's not what we want. What we want is to make sure that we are open, that our perspectives are healthy, that we are not engaging in the confirmation bias that leads to some of the acrimony that's on Facebook, social media, in our culture, all over the news right now. And primarily, it described the conflict between those people who think everybody should stay sheltered, and those people who think that if I don't protect my livelihood, it won't matter if we stay sheltered. I won't have a shelter. So there's two different perspectives, and as long as we're not entrenched and biased by those perspectives, we can respectfully disagree. It's just when we can't be respectful and we think we're so biased that we think our position is the only position, and your bias may be grounded in faulty information. That's where the danger lies. That's where sometimes irretrievable and irrevocable conflicts arise. So let's make sure that we are not clinging only to the information that supports our views. Let's make sure that we're doing our due diligence and we're getting a balanced set of facts and a balanced set of truth. The author here also goes on to say that confirmation bias will make us have a skewed view of information. Even when it comes to numerical figures, we will refuse to accept the data. But understanding that we have a level of confirmation bias should transform our worldview, our perspective on it. Lewis Carroll states, "We are what we believe we are, but it seems that the world is also what we believe it to be." So, what we believe we are comes from the information that we're taking in. The information that we take in is what helps form our perspective on ourselves, as well as this virus, as well as our community and our neighbors. So we need to make sure that the information that we take in is truth, it's verifiable, and that it's not just promoting one agenda, or it's not unfair, and it's not sent out with the agenda to be unfair and to be biased. It is really important that we also that we understand, how does our brain really analyze some of this information. This author quoted, "We are bombarded by information. It comes from other people, the media, our experience, and various other sources. Our minds must find means of encoding, storing, and retrieving the data we are exposed to." So what we like to do is take the easy way out and just cherry pick those facts and those circumstances that, you know what, I love this candidate, so I'm just going to listen to what is good about this candidate, and I'll listen to anything negative about the other candidates. Well, that's a very dangerous situation in some positions, because there are some candidates out there that aren't going to be truthful with you about their own credentials or their own experience, and then they may twist a little bit anything negative about other candidates, and even share information they know is untruthful. And it's up to us as individuals to make sure that we're analyzing all of that, we're doing our due diligence, and we're not just accepting those biased information and those biased views. So one of the biggest problems with the world today is that we have large groups of people who will accept whatever they hear on the media instead of analyzing information and data, doing due diligence to confirm truth and validity. We don't want to be a member of that group, because that group is what will really cause a lot of conflict and a lot of misinformation in our community. What we want to be are people that have positive perspectives, that are looking at everything that either the media is giving us, that is that the information that we're getting from our leaders, the information that we're getting from news stories, and doing our due diligence. We can go to the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, and we can see the data for ourselves. We do not have to blindly accept the information. When you receive negative information from one candidate about another in any race, go to all the candidates' websites. Check out what is happening and what they've done, how they've served your community. I want you to go to my website, www.judgekathyschrader.com. Politics does not have to be nasty. Our community does not have to be nasty. Our media does not have to be nasty. But in order to change that, we need to demand better. And we need to start demanding better one person at a time. And how do we change that? One person at a time, we change our perspective. We stop accepting biased reports. We stop accepting just what we want to hear. We start doing our due diligence. We start making sure that the information that we are operating on has been analyzed thoroughly by us individually. Nobody else is going to do it for you. You got to do it yourself. So analyze the information, assess the agendas behind the information that and the source that it's come from. You got to apply your perception. You got to apply what the needs are of your family, and you have to make the best decision possible for you. And you can do that. And you can do that without being influenced by any of these negativities, negative stories, the negativities in the media on Facebook. I think that if we all start holding our communities to a higher level, we start demanding better out of all of our leaders, our church leaders, our family leaders, our community leaders, our political leaders, every leader, then we're going to see a difference in our community. Again, we can crush COVID-19 together. And what that means is, in all ways and all levels, we can come out of this better and stronger. We are going to come out of this. It's already lifting. Businesses are opening up. The economy is stabilizing and growing. There are issues out there. We need to be worried about our farmers and harvesting the crops. We need to be worried about our healthcare workers and burnout. We need to be worried about our vulnerable. Absolutely. But we also need to be hopeful about the future and what we have in store. And the best future that we can have is to make sure we're demanding better out of everybody that is delivering information about all the crucial issues in our community right now. And I think as long as we do that together, we will make a difference. So I want to thank you all for joining me tonight. I'll place this little link that I shared with you earlier. She really put a comical spin on a serious information or a serious situation where we're getting disinformation. It just, and again, it's up to us to analyze that. So make sure that you have a strong, positive perception of how we're going to crush COVID-19 together, how we're going to build a stronger community, and how together we can make a difference. Thank you, everyone, and I will see you tomorrow.